Which stadium today could evacuate 50,000 people in just 15 minutes? Allegiant Stadium in Vegas? AT&T Stadium in Dallas? Wrong. The answer is a stadium that's 2,000 years old, standing right in the heart of ancient Rome, an icon that has witnessed echoes of the entire history of the Roman Empire. Stop whatever you're doing, because in the next few minutes, you'll hear a story that will make us question modern safety codes, structural engineering textbooks, and even how we think about sustainable infrastructure in America. The Colosseum, a mountain of stone, yet it ran like a machine, channeling tens of thousands of people in and out like flowing water. Not magic, but science, engineering, and vision. And today, we're going to break down 3 secrets that kept it alive and thriving for 20 centuries. Man-made geology engineered new ground, thick and smart enough to hug unstable soil and dissipate seismic shocks as if it were natural bedrock. Self-healing concrete, a mix that grows stronger with age. Turning rainwater, even seawater, into an ally. Form over mass arches and keystones that make gravity a teammate, not an adversary. Sounds distant from America today? Think again. Picture an NFL game day, tens of thousands pouring in, tens of thousands pouring out. Think of modern evacuation codes, of mega projects going billions over budget, and the question we never stop asking, how do we build to last a century or more? And here's the hook for California. Earthquake country. If we tried to rebuild the Colosseum in Los Angeles on shaky ground, with cutting-edge tech and digital simulations, could we actually do it? The answer will surprise you. Because what has kept the Colosseum standing isn't just technology, it's how the Romans thought about time, materials, and geometry. So if you're an engineer, an architect, or simply someone who cares about the future of American infrastructure, this episode is for you. Let's step inside the Colosseum where the foundation is the brain, the concrete the muscle, and the geometry the soul, to see how 2,000 years ago, Rome beat every deadline we still struggle with today. Let's rewind time to the 1st century AD. At the heart of Rome, there wasn't yet a Colosseum, but a massive artificial lake, part of the Golden House, the extravagant, almost insane palace of Emperor Nero. Picture this. While ordinary Romans crammed into tight, smoky neighborhoods, Nero dug out an enormous lake in the middle of the city, purely as a backdrop for his private villa. It was so indulgent, so out of touch, that even Rome's elite found it offensive. When Nero died, Rome needed a new symbol, something to erase the memory of his excess and to show that imperial power belonged with the people, not just the throne. That's when Emperor Vespasian, founder of the Flavian dynasty, made a bold decision: drain Nero's lake and build, right on top of it, a structure for everyone. Quick pause, this wasn't just politics, it was urban strategy. Think about when an American city turns a brownfield, a polluted, abandoned industrial site into a park or a stadium. Same principle, convert the wreckage of excess into shared civic value. Vespasian knew architecture wasn't only about shelter or aesthetics, it was a language of power and legitimacy. A statement that would resonate across the entire history of the Roman Empire. The Colosseum wasn't simply an arena, it was a stone proclamation. This empire belongs to the people of Rome. We'll give them bread and the grandest entertainment ever built. From Nero's muddy lake, Rome gained a people's stadium where tens of thousands could gather, cheer, forget daily struggles, and feel part of something far greater than themselves. And that's the first lesson the Colosseum leaves us. Land use transformation from private indulgence to public good, a motif that never gets old, from ancient Rome all the way to American cities today. If you want to know the first secret behind how the Colosseum has stood for nearly 2,000 years, don't look at its arches or stone walls. Look under your feet at the foundation. The Romans faced a nightmare scenario for any engineer, building a structure that weighed hundreds of thousands of tons on the muddy remains of Nero's old lake. Put the foundation in wrong, and the whole thing collapses. So what did they do? First, they prepared a massive elliptical foundation about 189 by 156 meters, 615 by 510 feet, and a concrete ring roughly 13 meters high and 54 meters wide, set about 9 meters deep into the clay of Nero's drained lake. It was an almost unthinkable excavation for its time. Archaeology shows traces of oak timbers, but the load path was carried by this artificial geology, a continuous ring that spread loads and damped seismic shocks. When modern engineers studied it, they realized Rome didn't just pour a footing, they created an artificial geology, a base stronger than natural ground. It spread loads evenly, absorbed seismic shocks, and was designed to survive earthquakes that destroyed countless other ancient buildings. Sound familiar? Today in the US, we talk about deep foundations with drilled shafts, or matte foundations several feet thick under skyscrapers. But Rome was doing the same thing 2,000 years ago, without cranes, without drill rigs, without modeling software, just math, engineering intuition, and patience. And here's the real takeaway. Every great structure begins with something no one ever sees. The Colosseum doesn't endure because of what dazzles above ground, but because of what humbly lies beneath. It's the same with us. An American city can show off a skyline of glass towers or billion-dollar stadiums, but its real longevity depends on what's hidden below. Water systems, sewers, subway tunnels, transit lines. We don't post them on Instagram, we don't brag about them, but if they fail, the city fails. The Colosseum reminds us, humility isn't weakness, it's real strength. Lay the right foundation even if nobody notices, and you build not just for decades, but for centuries, maybe even millennia. If the foundation was the backbone of the Colosseum, then concrete was its flesh and blood. And this is the second great secret of how it defied time. The recipe sounds familiar. Lime, water, sand, aggregate. But the magic ingredient was pozzolan volcanic ash plus extras like pumice from the region around Vesuvius. The result wasn't just strong, it could even set and harden underwater. That's why the Romans could build harbors, aqueducts, and of course, the Colosseum. But the real shock isn't the ingredients, it's their mixing technique. Today, if you saw little white flecks of lime in concrete, you'd call it sloppy work. Poor quality for the Romans. Those flecks were the key to immortality. Instead of slaking lime before mixing, they used a method called hot mixing, throwing quicklime straight into the blend. The violent reaction released heat, creating tiny white lime clasps scattered throughout the concrete. At first glance, a flaw, but centuries later, when microcracks formed, water seeped in, reacted with those lime clasps, and produced a calcium-rich solution. That solution then crystallized into calcium carbonate, literally sealing the cracks shut. In other words, Roman concrete healed itself. It didn't weaken with age, it aged in a way that made it stronger. Now compare that to America's coastal piers, seawalls, or the infrastructure around San Francisco Bay. Every year, we spend billions just fighting the same enemy, water and salt. So imagine if our concrete could self-heal, patch its own cracks, adapt to salt water, reinforce itself over time. How different would our maintenance budgets look? But the Colosseum teaches us something bigger than just a material formula. It teaches us a philosophy of time. The Romans didn't think in terms of 4-year or 8-year cycles. They thought in centuries. When they poured a batch of concrete, they didn't ask, will it last 50 years, they asked? Will it still stand after 500? After 1,000? And here's the result. They were right. Modern concrete inevitably cracks, degrades, demands constant repair. Roman concrete? It endures day after day, storm after storm, actually growing stronger with age. The message couldn't be clearer. Invest with a long horizon, not just in construction, but in every part of life. Don't just think about a term in office, think about a legacy. The Colosseum is living proof. When you dare to build for centuries, your work can outlast millennia. If the foundation was the hidden soul of the Colosseum, and concrete its flesh and blood, then the arches were its skeleton, the framework that turned it into an immortal masterpiece. At the heart of every arch lies the keystone, a wedge-shaped stone placed at the very top. It wasn't just the last piece to close the arch, it was the key that held the entire structure together. All the force from the surrounding stones pushed inward toward the keystone, which then redistributed that force evenly down into the supports. In doing so, the Romans pulled off something brilliant. Instead of letting gravity destroy the building, they turned gravity into an invisible cement, locking everything in place for thousands of years. This was the art of turning an enemy into an ally. Gravity, the very thing that crushes most structures, became their free, eternal glue. Now, compare that to America today. When we want to span huge distances in an NFL stadium or build the sweeping roof of a modern arena, we use steel and reinforced concrete. We force materials to fight gravity. The Romans, with no steel, optimized geometry. They didn't resist force, they guided it. They let the very shape of the structure carry the load. That's why their design philosophy was so radical and so timeless. Form follows force. Shape wasn't driven by random aesthetics, it was dictated by the natural flow of physics. When you let a structure follow the path of least resistance, you use less material, and yet the building stands stronger. The result? A stadium that once held nearly 80,000 people, with thousands of arches, still standing tall after 2,000 years. And here's the deeper lesson. This isn't just about architecture. It's about how we design systems, organizations, even our lives. Don't keep piling on layers of resistance, complexity, or force. Find the natural flow of the problem, then design so that the energy distributes itself. The Romans proved that true strength doesn't come from more material. It comes from smarter arrangement. To build the Colosseum, the Romans didn't just need stone, lime, or concrete. They needed a giant machine of organization, what we would call today mega project management. Picture this: over 100,000 cubic meters of travertine, hundreds of thousands of tons of stone, plus vast amounts of wood, tough, bricks, and metal. All of it had to move from the Tivoli quarries to the center of Rome. The Romans solved it with a supply chain that looks shockingly modern. A dedicated road from the quarry, ox carts hauling stone to the Anio River, barges floating it down the Tiber, straight into the construction site. In other words, first-century multimodal logistics. Once on site, they didn't build block by block in sequence. They divided the Colosseum into zones, work packages, and had dozens of crews working in parallel, 24/7. One team on foundations, another raising walls, others installing marble cladding. That pace, combined with shift work around the clock, collapsed the timeline from what could have been decades to about a decade, with major phases from AD 70-72 to the inauguration in AD 80 and further additions under Domitian. The workforce was a micro-society: masons, carpenters, engineers, designers mixed with thousands of unskilled laborers, slaves, and prisoners of war. This is the darker side of history we can't gloss over. The Colosseum was built not only with genius, but with the sweat and blood of people who had no choice. No need to romanticize, that's the truth. Now compare it to America today. This was essentially the ancient world's largest EPC project: engineering, procurement, construction with a tightly managed critical path. And the lesson? Many U.S. mega projects, from New York subways to California bridges to NFL stadiums, go over budget and behind schedule by billions. The Romans proved something crucial. Logistics and organization are not side notes. They're half the miracle. Their engineering impresses us, but it was project management that got the Colosseum delivered on time and still standing today. If material logistics was half the miracle, then human logistics was the other half. And here, the Colosseum was 1,000 years ahead of its time. The Romans designed a system called vomitoria, and no, it has nothing to do with vomit. It means passageways that could literally spew people out. There were 80 numbered arches at ground level, each one leading directly to a specific seating zone. That meant the entire crowd, around 50,000 spectators, with some estimates up to 80,000, could be dispersed within minutes, thanks to its 80 vomitoria and numbered entrances. Remember, this was the 1st century. No CCTV, no PA system, no mobile apps guiding you to your section, just pure architecture. And it wasn't only about speed, it was about social order encoded into space. The lowest tier, the podium, was reserved for the emperor, senators, and nobility. Above them, the Maenianum Primum for the equestrian class, then the Maenianum Secundum for the common people. And at the very top, the wooden Maenianum Summum in Lignes, sat women, slaves, and the lowest classes. Where you sat literally reflected who you were in Rome's hierarchy. Sound familiar? That's basically the original zoning and ticketing system. Today, whether you walk into AT&T Stadium in Dallas or the Big House in Michigan, your ticket tells you exactly which gate, section, and row to enter. That whole game day logistics challenge, moving tens of thousands of fans in and out smoothly, was solved by the Romans 2,000 years ago. What makes the Colosseum extraordinary is that the Romans didn't have a concept of UX design the way we do today. But they had an instinct for crowd science, one-way circulation, narrow corridors opening into wide spaces to reduce panic and create a sense of relief. This was architecture tuned to human psychology, and it's why the Colosseum remains a gold standard in crowd management, even for modern stadiums. And here's the takeaway. Whether you're building an app, a stadium, or an entire city, user experience doesn't start with technology, it starts with understanding human flow. A modern stadium might have surround sound and a giant LED screen, but without clean water and sanitation, the whole experience collapses after a single game. The Romans understood this 2,000 years ago. The Colosseum was directly connected to Rome's aqueduct system, the highways of water of the ancient world. Water flowed into storage cisterns, branched out to fountains, drinking taps, and even public restrooms for tens of thousands of spectators. After a bloody gladiator fight or a wild beast hunt, the arena floor could be washed down the very same day thanks to an underground channel network. All that wastewater, along with rain, was funneled into the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer, one of the oldest functioning sewer systems in the world. Ancient writers mention that in its early years, the arena may have been flooded for mock naval battles, but this remains debated. Once the hypogeum, underground chambers, was added under Domitian, full-scale flooding became impossible. If construction logistics was one miracle, daily operations were another. From day one, the Colosseum was operations ready: drinking water, public sanitation, stormwater drainage. Spectators came, experienced the spectacle, and left without the infrastructure services ever getting in the way. To an American audience today, that feels familiar. We have plumbing codes, stormwater systems, green infrastructure, designed to keep stadiums running smoothly, cleanly, and sustainably. But here's the kicker. The Romans had those same principles in 80 AD. And the most astonishing part isn't just the engineering, it's the mindset. O&M operations and maintenance was baked into the design from the start. That's why, 2,000 years later, the Colosseum can still tell the story of an infrastructure system that ran flawlessly. If you've ever sat through a game under the blazing sun in California or Texas, you know one truth: shade is a luxury. The Romans solved that problem 2,000 years ago with an innovation that sounds almost insane. The velarium, a massive sail-like canopy, likely shading about 1/3 of the seating, operated by sailors from the Roman fleet at Misenum, whose rigging skills with sails, ropes, and wind made coordinated deployment possible. The system used dozens of wooden masts, thousands of feet of hemp rope, and giant linen panels. In practice, it worked like a massive ship anchored on land. But the velarium wasn't just about shade, it also redirected breezes, guiding airflow to create a natural cooling effect basically. An ancient HVAC system, powered by wind and sunlight, not a single watt of electricity. Tens of thousands of spectators could sit for hours during the brutal Italian summer without baking like in an oven. And here's the takeaway for us today. When you understand wind and light, you reduce your dependence on artificial energy. That's a principle American cities, especially in hot, dry regions like Arizona, Nevada, or Texas, should take to heart. Sometimes, sustainable solutions don't come from high-tech systems, but from relearning what nature and history already taught us. The velarium proved that comfort doesn't have to mean sky-high energy bills. It happens when engineers, and yes, even sailors, learn to master the wind. If the foundation was the Colosseum's hidden soul, then the materials were its language. The Romans lived by a principle engineers today would call right material, right place. Travertine, a super durable limestone from Tivoli, just 20 miles outside Rome, was reserved for the load-bearing structure and the outer facade. It carried massive weight, shrugged off centuries of rain and sun, and that's why the Colosseum's face still looks commanding nearly 2,000 years later. Tuff, a lighter, cheaper volcanic stone, was used for interior walls and arches. It reduced the overall weight of the building. In other words, travertine carried the load. Tuff eased the burden. Brick and Roman concrete formed the backbone of the underground walls and arches, where economy and ease of construction mattered more than beauty. And for the wow factor, marble and bronze. Marble slabs for the noble seats, statues of gods set into niches, bronze railings, all designed to transform the Colosseum from a public utility into a public spectacle. The Romans never went with one-size-fits-all. They matched each material to its role, balancing strength, cost, and aesthetics at the same time. And the lesson for us, especially here in America today, in an era when global supply chains can break overnight, building with local materials isn't just about cutting transport costs or reducing carbon footprint. It makes structures more resilient to the environment they actually live in. That's a local-first philosophy the Romans mastered 2,000 years ago, and one we're still trying to relearn. At first glance, you might think, with 3D printing, super cranes, and AI design, rebuilding the Colosseum today should be easy, right? The truth is, almost impossible, because at least 3 huge barriers stand in the way. First, materials. The Colosseum didn't just survive because of clever design, it survived because of its self-healing concrete. The Roman recipe of lime, volcanic ash, pozzolan, and hot mixing created a material that could literally patch its own cracks with calcium carbonate every time water seeped in. We don't have a self-healing concrete at industrial scale that lasts for millennia. Modern concrete? Durable, Yes, but 50 years, maybe 100. 2000? Not even close. Second, cost and labor. Rome had an enormous workforce: skilled masons, artisans, but also slaves and prisoners of war who worked at virtually no cost. Today, every single travertine block quarried, cut, transported, and set would cost hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars apiece. Add modern labor standards, workplace safety, and union wages, and the budget for a Colosseum-scale project would skyrocket into the unimaginable. Third, time and regulations. The Romans began construction around AD 70-72, inaugurated it in AD 80, and continued works under Domitian, a pace that would be extremely hard to match today. Imagine attempting the same in America today. Zoning approvals, environmental impact statements, community hearings, building codes, seismic reviews, supply chain bottlenecks, even with cutting-edge tech. Bureaucracy and logistics would stretch the project into decades if it ever got finished at all. In other words, the Colosseum isn't just a structure, it's a product of its context, a perfect convergence of materials, labor systems, politics, and philosophy. And that's why, with all our 21st century technology, we can admire it, we can study it, but we can't just copy-paste a 2,000-year-old masterpiece. If there's one word that defines the Colosseum, it isn't grand or lavish, it's sustainable. The Romans didn't design for a single generation, they designed for millennia. And that's the exact lesson America's infrastructure needs right now. Design for longevity. When you build to last 2,000 years, you don't go for cheap now, expensive later. The Colosseum proves that investing in solid foundations and the right materials up front drastically cuts future maintenance costs. Compare that with the hundreds of billions of dollars the US spends each year patching bridges, highways, and water systems, and the takeaway is clear: longevity equals savings. Local materials and circularity. The Romans quarried travertine from Tivoli, tough from the outskirts of Rome, and leaned on local supply chains. That cut transport costs, lowered the footprint, and made their structures naturally fit the environment. The American takeaway? Local sourcing, recycling, and circular economies aren't just green slogans. They're the key to resilient infrastructure. Seismic and climate resilience. The Colosseum's artificial geologic foundation was engineered to withstand earthquakes, a case study with obvious value for America's West Coast. And its volcanic ash concrete, resistant to seawater corrosion? That's exactly what coastal cities from Miami to New Orleans need as they face sea level rise and saltwater intrusion. But the Colosseum isn't just a manual on materials and design. It carries a deeper reminder. Time doesn't always destroy. With the right foundation, it can strengthen. Just as Roman concrete could heal its cracks, we too need a kind of spiritual foundation, one that lets us bend, adapt, and come back stronger when shocks hit. At the city level, that's resilience. At the human level, it's self-healing. And the Colosseum still stands as proof. Design it right, and both structures and people can grow stronger with age. The Colosseum hasn't survived 2,000 years on engineering genius alone. It has also survived the wounds inflicted by people. For centuries, its travertine blocks were stripped away to build churches, including St. Peter's Basilica. The iron clamps, once bound with lead, were pried out, leaving the pockmarks still visible on its walls today. Then came earthquakes, fires, wars, each disaster carving new scars. And yet, the Colosseum still stands, not whole, not untouched, but towering, unshaken, as the eternal symbol of Rome. It proves that a structure can be both glorious and wounded, and that its scars only highlight its resilience. Today, the Colosseum is more than an Italian treasure. It belongs to all of humanity. And it reminds us that preservation isn't just about saving stone and concrete. It's about holding on to a philosophy. Build for centuries. Build for generations. Build for our collective memory. The Colosseum left us with a timeless formula. 3 keys made this miracle possible, lessons that still outshine projects across the entire history of the Roman Empire. The right foundation, proving that what no one sees often determines a structure's lifespan. Materials that age well. Roman concrete didn't weaken over time. It grew stronger. Smart geometry, turning gravity from a destroyer into a stabilizer. This wasn't just ancient engineering, it was a philosophy. Build for centuries, not for election cycles. And that lesson still matters in America today. From public works and stadiums, to coastal ports and even university campuses, every choice of material, design, and logistics can turn a project into either a burden or a legacy. So here's the final question for you. If you could reimagine one ancient structure to serve your community for the next 300 years, which would you choose, and in which state? And don't forget to comment, which ancient wonder should we decode next? Acropolis, Petra, or Teotihuacan?